In 1884, a Joseph A. Cassidy baptismal certificate was collected from that year, and he is Nancy's father from our very first bit, and he's the son of Patrick Cassidy and Ann Murphy. He was born on the 10th of November 1884, baptized on the 16th, and he uh, reaches adulthood. And in 1919, he marries Anna L. McGorry, and the L stands for Lillian. And yes, that is interesting that he marries someone named McGorry, just like his sister did. The parents are different. So, what was discovered was that uh, siblings married first cousins. And then Francis P. Cassidy, his younger brother, is the best man, as you can see on that certificate of marriage from the health department. In 1889, another child was born and baptized to Patrick and Ann Murphy, and this child is named Patrick. He's listed as being the fourth child of his mother, with four now living. Well, we know that that's not correct because his brother Joseph doesn't have a birth certificate. So we know that Mary was at least the third child. So if Joseph was the next child, then he'd be fourth, and this would be at least the fifth child. Um, so you always have to take it with a grain of salt and write it out, think it out, and read the question, because in this time period, the question is number of child of mother. So that should be very sequential. We'll see in a minute why that's important to pay attention. He's short lived. He dies in less than a year. So those are the details for little Patrick. He dies before the 1890 police census. That's why he's not in it. Then in 1891, another child is born. He does not have a civil birth certificate, just a baptismal registration. So he was born on September 28th, 1891, and he was christened on the 4th of October that year. And then he died in 1898, so there's a copy of his death certificate. And then lastly, in 1894, Francis Patrick Cassidy is born, and he does have a civil birth certificate as well as a christening record. And the civil birth record, the question is now changed. It doesn't ask number of child born to mother, it asks number of previous children, number now living. So the number of previous children is 7, and the number now living is 5. And when he's born, Edward is still living. So the 5 children living would presumably be Michael, Mamie, Joseph, Edward, and Francis. And then if there were 7 previous children, it would mean that there's a total of 8 children and that 3 are missing. And we know that Patrick was born in 1889 and dies in 1890, so that's 1. So there's hypothetically 2 children that were curious about where did they go. And Frank, who was born in 1894 and christened in 1895, a few weeks later after New Year's, he grows up and in 1921 marries a woman named Anna Griffin. So quite a family from immigrants, Patrick Cassidy and his wife Anna Murphy. And then Frank does grow up and applies for a passport when he travels to Europe for work, and he gives the naturalization information for his father and an arrival date for his father of January of 1881. And there's a photograph of Frank in the lower right. So gleaning Cassidy connections thus far. The 1880 census clearly lists that there's Cassidy brothers Joseph and Michael, and Joseph's married to a woman, Margaret McKeon Cassidy. January of 82, Michael weds Catherine McKeon with Patrick as best man. And then in September of 82, Mamie's born. December of 82, Mary's born. January of 83, their cousin Joseph is born. And in June of 83, Mary dies at Anna Murphy Cassidy's apartment. In January of 95, Francis Cassidy's baptized, and his godmother by proxy is a woman named Elizabeth Cassidy, presumably the Elizabeth Cassidy living with Joseph Cassidy in 1890 and in 1900. And that would make her the child's aunt. And then in the autumn of 1890 and June of 1900, census shows Joseph living with Lizzie. In 1882, there's a birth of her being the third born. So there's a question mark child, Mike, and then Mamie, two alive, Mike and Mamie. In 1889, he's the fourth child born, presumably Mike, Mamie, Joe, and Pat, and then four alive, Mike, Mamie, Joe, and Pat. In 1894, there's seven previously born, so there'd be a question mark, Mike, Mamie, Joe, question mark, Pat, Ed, and then five alive, Mike, Mamie, Joe, Ed, and Frank. 1900 and 1910, the census question asked number of children born, and it says 7, and the number alive is 4. So that would mean that there's one missing child that we're trying to determine. Mike, Mamie, Joe, Pat, Ed, and Frank are identifiable, and then 4 were living, Mike, Mamie, Joe, and Frank. 2 of the brothers did naturalize. Joseph Cassidy's naturalization papers are here. You see the index card showing that he was living at 416 East 18th Street, the same as the census that year. He's a Boilermaker, so we know we have the right fellow. He and his wife would become citizens on October 18th, 1880. He by naturalization, and she by the fact that she was the wife of a new citizen. As you can see, it doesn't give any details about where in Ireland Joseph is from. He apparently cannot read or write, as both documents are signed Joseph Hismark Cassidy. In 1892, a declaration of intent is found for Patrick Cassidy, and in 1894, a petition for citizenship. And in this time frame, his wife and any minor children who weren't citizens would be naturalized along with him. The 1900 census made it clear that all the children were born in the United States. And they were living at 275 Avenue B in 1894, but at 551 East 16th Street, so it's the same address as the 1890 police census, so we know we have the same family. And then by 1924, the naturalized and native voters are listed. So Joseph and his wife Nellie are listed at East 119th Street. Michael J. and Margaret are listed. Joseph A., Frank, the widowed Anna, Lillian, and Mamie McGorry are all listed. And then Joseph J., Sr., and Bridget are listed as well. So a Cassidy timeline just showing that in 1879, Joseph Cassidy is listed as the machinist at 416 East 18th Street. That's near First Avenue. And then he stays there for several years, and then after his wife and daughter die, he no longer appears in the city directory for several years. And then in the election rolls in 1884, he is at 421 East 14th Street. And then you're able to track the family back and forth from city directories and vital records and voting records and census records over the years to see that Patrick and Joseph stay in the Gas House District for a while, Patrick much longer. Then Joseph moves up to the East 30s, and Patrick through 1900 remains in the Gas House District at 275 Avenue B, and that's near East 14th Street. But Michael does something that's rare for Irish immigrants. He crosses Fifth Avenue. Most of the time, if they move in on the east side, they move up, but they always stay east of where Fifth Avenue is. If they move west of Fifth Avenue initially, then they continue to move north as their fortunes improve, but they stay west of Fifth Avenue. Michael does appear in a newspaper story, tragically, If It Bleeds, It Leads, and this is a story about how he ran out into the street from his house at 400 West 32nd Street, and he was on fire. His clothes were. And the policeman asked him how that happened, and he said he would tell no one but the priest. He died shortly thereafter, and there are no other stories, so that's very interesting. And here are the death certificates for Michael and Patrick Cassidy. On the left, in 1905, Michael is listed as being the son of Michael Cassidy and Mary Ravey. And on the right, Patrick is listed as being the son of John Cassidy and Mary Ravey. And he died in 1908. And he's living at 1275 First Avenue, which is about East 69th Street. So they've moved up again on the east side from their gas house beginnings. And their brother and sister died 20 years later in 1928. Elizabeth is the daughter of Michael Cassidy and Mary Ravey, and then Joseph is listed as being the son of Michael Cassidy and Mary Ravey. So comparing the siblings' death records, 3 of the 4 are the children of Michael Cassidy, all 4 are children of Mary Ravey/Raby. So John Cassidy, as Patrick's father, is an outlier. And who were the likely informants? Patrick married in Ireland circa 1877. Might this marriage record clarify things? So that's a question we will consider and keep hoping for an answer. There's the cemetery deed for Joseph Cassidy from Calvary Cemetery. They do not have a headstone, but the little white cross marks where their grave is. And here's an interment list. So Joseph there is apparently married 3 times, according to family tradition. Margaret Cassidy and a daughter, Mary Cassidy, are buried in 1883. And then second wife Ellen and her daughter Anne are buried in 1889. And then Joseph in 1928. And his third wife, Bridget, survives him, and she's buried in 1933. Here's some information comparing the Cassidy plots at Calvary. Joseph's burials are in 83, 83, 89, 89, 28, and 33. Patrick purchased his grave to bury little Patrick in 1890, then there Edward in 1898, himself in 1908, and Anna in 1942. There are apparently no other children buried in that grave that we don't know of, so we're still trying to figure out who the question mark is. The McGorrys, Mamie and her husband are buried, her husband in 41 and herself in 66. And then Michael Cassidy's grave is purchased to bury him in 1905. In 1920, Catherine McKeon Cassidy is buried there. In 1931, their grandson. In 1940, their daughter-in-law. In 1944, their granddaughter's daughter, so their great-granddaughter. And then in 1958, their son, Joseph, would be buried in that grave. And then Lizzie Cassidy is buried in 1928 in a grave purchased by her nephew. And then in 1932, her nephew's daughter, a 9-day-old daughter, is buried. 1948, her nephew Joseph. And in 1983, his wife Sarah. Those are Marion's sister and her parents. And then the McKeons, Terrence and Mary, are listed as godparents. They're buried Terrence in 1910 and Mary in 1914. So death certificates for 2 of the Mrs. Cassidys, the wives of Michael and Patrick, are here. And Catherine died on Blackwell's Island, so quite a bit of information was collected about her, who her parents were, that were able to track her back to Tynan Parish, County Armagh. Whereas Anne, we are not able to, especially with a common name like Murphy, we're not given enough correct details to really take her back. We just know that she married Patrick wherever they were from, more than likely in Ireland, before emigrating. And then Joseph Cassidy married 3 times. There's a picture of him with his third wife, Bridget Benson. So he was married to Margaret McKeon from 1878 to 1882, Ellen Hart from 1885 to 1889, and Bridget Benson from 1892 to 1928. None of the 3 marriages were recorded civilly, and here are the transcription certificates from the 3 marriages.